Well, I first of all want to thank you for giving me your precious time on a Saturday when you could have been spending that time with your families and enjoying your weekend.
You guys are fun.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Gentlemen, I'm going to share with you the story of my country, Somaliland. It's a story that needs to be told. It's a story that needs to have the truth told about it. I will give you a brief so you'll have something, reference documents. But I will share with you the reality of the Horn of Africa, the Somali Horn of Africa, a horn that is very troubled, an area of the world that has known a lot of conflict and which we hope will stabilize and become an area of the world where children can grow in peace, where our youth can be educated, where we can develop our trade and our relationships stronger. We can become a commercial hub. But before that happens, we need peace. Peace is the foundation of all development. I know that you here know what Somaliland is, or where Somaliland is. As you know, Somaliland is the former British Somaliland Protectorate. To our west, there is the La Côte Française des Somalie, or the territory of the Afars and the Isas, which is now the Republic of Djibouti. Then you have British Somaliland Protectorate. And then to the east, we have La Somalia Italiana, Italian colony of Somalia, and one of the three colonies that Italy had in Africa: Somalia, Eritrea, and Libya. It's geography, it's history, it's fact. You cannot change it, I cannot change it. That is history. But very few people know about it. Somaliland is the only country among those countries that has never been colonized. We had a treaty of protection with Great Britain. Djibouti was a colony, Somalia was a colony. But Somaliland was the British Somaliland Protectorate. That is very important because as a protectorate, we have always been sovereign. Somaliland gained its independence on the 26th of June, 1960. We have the same birthday, the same Independence Day as Madagascar. And we became the 12th independent country in Africa. 42 countries sitting in the African Union today were still under colonial rule when Somaliland became independent. We have, because Somaliland had its sovereignty, we had a very powerful national movements that were campaigning for the independence of all nations. There was the wind of change, the wind of freedom in the late 50s, in the mid 50s, and the time of Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and Jomo Kenyatta, Hastings Banda. These are the people who were campaigning for the independence of the African countries. And the vision at that time was when these African countries would become independent, then they would form the great Pan-African movement. Our people in the 50s had that vision of unity, of cooperation, because unity is strength. Unity brings economic power. It encourages trade. Unity, wanting to unite African nations, was not something that was imposed on us, but it was something that was born out of our leaders, from our leaders, encouraged from our leaders. And our late president, Mohammed Ibrahim Egal, who was also my first husband, was one of the leaders who campaigned for the independence of African nations and Somali nations. Because we were not a colony, we had the freedom to speak and campaign. Italy was oppressing the people in Somalia. They could not hold open political campaigns. But we in Somaliland could. And for 1 year before independence, the British groomed Mohammed Ibrahim Egal, who became the first president of an independent Somali nation on the 26th of June 1960. But for 1 year, he was the leader of the government. So the British were training him to hand over the reins of governance to him. These were times when we were were passionate about our freedom, about our independence. You in Ethiopia were lucky because you were already a nation that has never been colonized. You were always free. Ethiopia is a great nation that has never known the oppression of colonialism, except for the Second World War, a few months of occupation by the Italians. But you have always been free. We also wanted to be free. When Somaliland became independent and the date was signed for the independence of Somaliland, we began to campaign for the other Somalis. And the first ones were the ones in Somalia. And the agreement was that when the two Somali nations would become independent, they would unite to form the basis, the foundation upon which future Somali nations would also join. Somaliland, therefore, is the firstborn, is the senior nation, is the first fully sovereign Somali nation. I am repeating that 20 times because that is the fact. I am repeating that because our neighbor Somalia, who is a junior partner, who became independent 1 week after Somaliland, somehow has given itself a position of owning Somaliland, given itself a position of deciding the fate of Somaliland. Where that has come from, we don't know, because Somalia has never owned Somaliland, has never won Somaliland, has never bought Somaliland. We were two independent sovereign nations who voluntarily united. Somalia, being the second independent Somali nation, somehow did not respect the Act of Union between former British Somaliland and former Eternal Somalia. The Act of Union that should have formalized our union was never signed, was never approved by the parliaments of the two nations. When there was a plebiscite, a referendum, they froze it because the referendum showed that the people of Somaliland did not accept the terms that Somalia had included in the Act of Union. So in fact, Somalia and Somaliland have never united formally. It was never a formal union. There was never a signed contract. There was never a marriage. It was an informal partnership. Many people refer to Somaliland as a country that is splitting, fragmenting from Somalia. It is not. Somaliland is withdrawing from the union it tried to establish with neighboring Somalia. And the territory of Somaliland, the territory of former British Somaliland Protectorate, is as it was designed in 1883. It is the same when we gained our independence on 26 June 1960, and it is the same today. Somaliland is supportive of the African Union Constitution that condemns the fragmentation of nations. Somaliland is not a Biafra, is not a section that is seceding or breaking away. It's not a breakaway region. It's an entity in itself, a country of Somaliland. I will give you a map. Our union is similar to the union that we had with the union that Gambia and Senegal had, exactly the same. Senegal was French, Gambia was British. Same ethnic people on both sides of the river. They united. They did not need the permission of anybody to unite. And after 6 months, it did not work. And they said, well, we were better as friends and neighbors. Let us go back to our status before the union. And they separated. They were only Senegambia for 6 months. When they separated, the world did not punish Gambia, did not punish Senegal. Their decision to unite was respected. Their decision to separate was also respected. This is exactly what happened between Somaliland and Somalia. The world accepted our union, but is not respecting our separation. Our separation came because our union failed. Our people were oppressed. Trade was moved from Somaliland to Somalia. Banking was moved. Diplomatic presence was denied in Somaliland. Our ports, our schools, our hospitals became shut down. And when the oppression intensified, they took punitive military measures. In fact, there was an attempted coup to separate. The father of Ambassador Salam was a leader of the coup that was attempted on the 10th of December, 1961. 1961. I was there because I was wounded. The union failed from the beginning. And when the wish to separate became denied, it turned into a freedom fighters, militia. Many of them sought refuge inside Ethiopia to fight the oppressors, the dictatorship of Siad Barre. From 1982 until 1991, a 9-year civil war continued to separate and withdraw from that union we went into with Somalia. And that war brought airplanes to bomb our cities. Russian MiG fighters were flattening our cities. Civilians were massacred. The weak, the sick, the old, the wounded were thrown into mass graves. Young children, school children, became mobile blood banks. Mobile blood banks because they would go into the classroom and they would say, you, come over. And they would bleed them. They would just take all their blood because they believed if they're young, 11, 12-year-old, their blood is healthy, they have no disease, and they would take all the blood from their child and use for their troops. And when this child collapses, they would throw him into a mass grave. 87 mass graves have been catalogued by the United Nations forensic teams. And we keep finding new mass graves even to this day. Every time it rains, it uncovers new mass graves. Each one containing dozens, if not hundreds, of human remains, with their clothes on, with their shoes on, with their belts on. Young ones, small skeletons, baby skeletons, 5, 6, 10-year-old skeletons. What is the military danger of killing a 5-year-old because he or she is from Somaliland? That was the crime they were executed for. I am describing this in detail because the world has to know this. In 1991, 9 years after our civil war ended, we defeated the troops of Siad Barre. Ambassador, Minister Abdullahi was another freedom fighter at that time, in the bush. Once the military aggressions were ousted, we began to rebuild our country. But before we could do that, we offered a general amnesty to all our people. All the clans, traditional elders, sultans, chiefs, leaders of Somaliland agreed on 2 things: the unanimous separation from Somalia, 2, their peace among themselves. No enmity, who was with who was fighting what, general amnesty. And that general amnesty also included the troops, about 30,000 troops of Somalia were still inside Somaliland territory and were as prisoners. And for 3 months, those soldiers who were captive, who were prisoners of war, were not shot, were not killed, were not starved. They were protected for 3 months. They were given food, they were given water. A Somali gives you water, he's giving you his life. We shared whatever we had with them. And once we secured a safe corridor, we said, go home. Just go back to Somalia. That is the best thing that we ever did. We could have denied them food. We could have denied them water. Within days, they would all have been dead. The crows would have had a feast. The hyenas would have had a feast. But that would have been the wrong thing to do. We started to rebuild our country. We brought our people back from refugee camps. The biggest refugee camp in East Africa was inside Ethiopia, Harta Sheikh. Ethiopia protected our weak, our sick, our refugees, protected them from other Somalis who were bombing them. You gave 1 million of our people protection, and we will always, always be appreciative and grateful for that. Others went to Yemen, others went to Djibouti, some went to Europe and as far as they could go, running away from an enemy who was their brother, another Somali. A Somali killing a Somali. We rebuilt our country with whatever we had left. There was no Marshall Plan, there was no, what was that name? There was no plan to rebuild Somaliland. We built it ourselves. There's no IMF. There was no peace dividend. There was no international support to rebuild Somaliland. There was no World Bank. There was no IMF. There was no bilateral aid. We did it with what we had and as best as we could. We developed our constitution. We established law and order. We demobilized our powerful militia that defeated Siad Barre. Not with international troops, but we did it our way, the traditional way. We disarmed a very powerful militia with less than $100,000, paid for by the people, by the community themselves. Our neighbor Somalia has had every nation support it and has failed to demobilize its Shabab and its militia. 28 international nations have been in Somalia. Americans have been there, the Germans were there, the Brits were there, the Ethiopians are there, the Djiboutians are there, the Kenyans are there, the Ugandans are there, the Rwandans are there, the Burundians are there, the Pakistanis were there. 28 nations have given their sons and the blood of their sons to protect Somalia, inside Somalia. And a victory is still not in sight. I don't know how many Ethiopian troops have died there. I don't know how many Americans have died there. Anybody who has watched Black Hawk Down will see the Marines who were dragged in the streets. Today it is Somalia refugees who are in Kenya, Dadaab, who are protected by Kenyans in Kenya. Once peace was secured, we started our nation building, developed our constitution, elected our members of parliament, developed political parties, held a referendum in 2001, attended by international observers, to decide, to ask the people, do you approve the constitution? And do you approve the separation from Somalia? And 97% of our people said, no more Somalia. My government, the government of Somaliland, is respecting the will of the people, the will of 97% of our people who said, no Somalia. Since then, we have held 5 peaceful presidential elections. Our current president, Musa Bihi, who was elected in '97, was elected, and I will give you the figures, 305,909 votes. He had 55% of the registered votes. Formaggio next door was elected with 184 votes. Who is a true president? This is the question I ask myself. Which one is a true president? The one who is elected by 1/3 of a million people in a population of 4 million. By the way, the land of Somaliland is bigger than 18 countries in Africa. Because many people think it's a small country. We are bigger than 18 countries. Our coastline is 850 kilometers long and pirate-free 850 kilometers coastline. When right next door in Somalia, in the tip of the Horn, in that region that calls itself Puntland now, Mijertenia, is known as the world's most pirate-infested waters in the world. So right next door is the most pirate-infested waters, where ships are pirated, where people are taken hostage. And in Somaliland, we have never had one single hostage taking, not one single act of piracy has taken place in Somaliland. And in the last 28 years that Somaliland has separated from Somalia, we've had one act of terrorism in 2008, instigated, of course, by neighboring Somalia. When Somalia experiences several terrorist acts a week, if not a day. The president of my country, Somaliland, controls the entire country of former British Somaliland Protectorate. All 175,000 square kilometers of it. The president of Formaggio does not even control one street. Even his presidency is protected by Amazon, protected for him. I wonder who is a president then? President of what? We have, Somalia has maintained peace and stability over the years. We trade with all nations. We trade with African nations. We trade with Asians. We trade with Arabs. We trade with Americans. We trade with British. We trade with all nations. Most of all, we enjoy a privileged position when it comes to our trade with Ethiopia. The port of Ethiopia has a partnership. The port of Berbera has a partnership with Ethiopia. And 19% of the port of Berbera is contracted to Ethiopia. Together we look after it. Together we manage it. Together we will build it. Together we will expand it. Together we will continue to trade with each other as we have done for millenniums and for centuries. The Berbera corridor is now being contracted and is being built. Ethiopia is in a very privileged and much appreciated position when it comes to trading with Somaliland. And at this point, I really want to thank the repeated hospitality and the welcome that our government and our delegations receive each time we come to Ethiopia. Ethiopia has become our second home. We come here for education. We come here for health. We come here for political discussions. Our partnership grows and strengthens from day to day. And I would like that to be recorded, please. Our expression of thanks and appreciation to be recorded. Recently, our president and his delegation traveled to the country of Guinea-Conakry, at the invitation of President Alpha Condé. Over the years, Somaliland heads of states, ministers, and delegations have visited over 90 countries. In each one of them, we have received warm, friendly welcome and receptions. Red carpets, presidential salutes, friendship. Our neighbors in Somalia have decided, for reasons unknown to us, to sever relations with Guinea for having welcomed the delegation from Somaliland. Now the question I ask myself is Somalia planning to sever relations with another 90 countries that have welcomed Somaliland? Is it planning to sever relations with Ethiopia, Djibouti, and others? we think this is a great disrespect to the president, who is very much loved by his people and respected by the rest of African governments, President Alpha Condé. It's a great disrespect and an insult to a head of state who cannot be given a dictation about who he can welcome to his country or not. President Alpha Condé does not need the permission of Shabab or terrorists or the heads of failed governments. And since Somalia is very expert in terrorism, I'm asking myself, are they inventing a new form of terrorism? Diplomatic terrorism? Political terrorism? This cannot work in Africa. Heads of states are sovereign and need to be respected as such. The world considers us to be still part of Somalia. When we united with Somalia, Somalia was one country. Today, Somalia is fragmented. Somaliland is intact, but former Italian Somalia is fragmented into mincemeat. Who speaks for Somalia? There is no country known as Somalia. It's little fiefdoms and little warlords who control sections of it. Who in their right mind would reunite with a failed state like Somalia? And for the record, Somaliland respects the territorial integrity of nations. We don't believe in fragmentation. We don't believe in secession. We don't believe in splintering a nation. Borders must remain as in the Constitution of the African Union, as they were at the time of independence, like Somaliland. And the only just thing to do is that since there is no Somalia, no intact Somalia, no government in Somalia, when Somaliland has been peaceful for 28 years, that's a long track record. There is no going back. There is no reunion with Somalia. We need to have dialogue to establish good neighborly relations, and Somaliland, from its position of strength, is ready to dialogue on how we can turn our region into a peaceful region. We're willing to dialogue, and as the special envoy of Somaliland for the peace dialogue, we're ready to talk to Somalia anytime about establishing peace and neighborly, and I will repeat, neighborly relations as two separate, independent nations. Somaliland will not be dictated to. Somaliland is not part of Somalia. Somaliland is not part of the federal or so-called federal government of Somalia. Somaliland is a sovereign country, and the international community needs to come to terms with that. I am going to give you this because, gentlemen, this is the Independence Declaration of Somaliland from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who is still alive today. This is history. This is fact. You cannot change it. I cannot change it. Somalia cannot change it. To prove Somaliland's independence, this is the congratulatory note from the United States of America by the Secretary of State of the United States of America, who sent it on the 26th of June, 1960. You're congratulating the Somaliland government on the achievement of your independence. Yeah, on the achievement of your independence in 1960. So when people say Somaliland wants its independence, they don't know what they're talking about. Somaliland has always been independent. And I have also added this to show you French Somaliland, Djibouti, British Somaliland, and some Italian Somalia. That's how the territory was at the time of independence. And gentlemen, I am happy to answer some questions if necessary. I will give you this as a reference, and my colleagues and the Minister of Health, who I should have introduced at the beginning, and I hope you will forgive me for this oversight, are here. We're here on a goodwill, not only for Somaliland, but for the entire Horn. We must be wise. We must build our nations, and we must bring peace to our Horn of Africa. We cannot spend all our energy on fights and weapons and killing. We must learn to build and grow. We must learn to improve. We must reach the development that other nations have reached because of peace and stability. So I thank you for having given me this opportunity to explain the position of my country to you. I hope you will share this with the world, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And of course, you will excuse me because I am 82 years old. If I talk too long, you will forgive me, but that's what grandmothers are for. Thank you.
So my first question is, at 82 years old, how do you stay so beautiful and so young? What's the magic? So my second question, your nation is lucky to have you. I've never listened to someone speak so eloquently for a country that we know very little about. I've never been to Somaliland, but I'm tempted to even come by your speech. And I was just listening to trying to watch your TEDx talk, and I was doing your background information because you didn't introduce yourself at the beginning. But it's like listening to it's like poetic justice. So thank you. So my question is, our Prime Minister is known to venture to nations like Sudan and even attempt to bring peace in Yemen, and trying to bridge the gap between Kenya and Somalia. Have you spoken to him? Have you, your president, in terms of having him play a role to bring the kinds of conclusion you want to see between Somaliland and Somalia? Thank you.
Your president is my friend. She's my colleague, my friend, and you're very, very lucky and blessed to have a woman president like Saleh. We were diplomats together in Djibouti when she was ambassador. And she's a great woman. I love her very much. Well, I just saw her in Vancouver a few weeks ago. We just kissed. Your Prime Minister did not forget to try and bring peace. He brought peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Who would have imagined, who would have thought that possible a year or two ago? The problem is, in Eritrea and in Ethiopia, you have people who can dialogue and speak and understand each other. Our neighbors in Somalia do not want peace because they are gaining from lawlessness. Lawlessness has become their trade. They don't want to come to the table. They don't want to accept anything short of domination or ownership of Somaliland. And this is not going to happen. When Somalia cannot even control its own country, that is the obstacle. We don't have a willing partner. We are ready. And your Prime Minister did not overlook that. He tried. My President and your Prime Minister have had several dialogues because together we work on the peace and stability of the Horn. Ethiopia is our biggest partner. That's why we have no pirates. That's why we have no terrorists. Together we keep watch. You sleep because we keep watch. We sleep because you keep watch. We keep watch for each other. Our partners, our neighbors in Somalia do not want peace.
Thank you. Regarding any kind of contacts you may have with Somalia, or the government based in Mogadishu, do you have or are you trying to have low-level contacts or indirect contacts with people that have let's say close contacts with the administration of Farmajo for with the administration of Farmajo to ensure, at least to try to have a neighborly dialogue and for the general well-being of the Horn region. My second question relates to there are disputed borders with Puntland, I understand. From time to time, there have been several daily clashes. What's the situation currently?
There has been no stable government in Somalia for the past 28 years. They've had 16 peace conferences to bring peace among themselves in Somalia, Italian Somalia. To this day, they are even more fragmented today. As you know, they've had every 4 years there's a new one who comes. Ali Mahdi, Hussein Aidid, and so on and so on and so on and so on to Farmajo. Every 4 years a new one comes. They change their name: transitional government, national government, federal government. I don't know, next one, I don't know what they're going to call it, no government. But somebody comes, gets nominated by 200 votes, spends $1-2 million, buys the votes, collects as much money as he can, and goes away and makes room for the next one. The people of Somalia are suffering, but the people of Somalia have no vote, have no voice. They have no peace. They have not known peace for 28 years. We have contacts with people who try to mediate. Britain has held mediations with us, with the government of Somalia. Turkey, twice. The Emirates, the Egyptians have tried. Everybody has tried. But Somalia does not want peace. Now, when it comes to the region that is referred to as Puntland, is the region of Migertenia. You know, in the Somalia Italiana, if you look at all the regions, Mudug, Migertenia, Banaadir, and Bay, Bakal, these are all the regions, Juba, and the region of Migertenia changed its name in 1998, 21 years ago, to Puntland. But it's a region of Somalia. And of course, because it's the nearest one, the one that we have a border with, there are always skirmishes and there are always aggressions. But the boundaries of Somaliland are not disputed. They are as the British has left them in 1960.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam, for this briefing. You enlightened us a lot about our neighbor, which we only know a little about. Thank you for that. I have a few questions. The first one is, let me introduce myself. I'm Andualam Sisa. I write for New Business Ethiopia. It's a more economic website. And I also write for Daily Nation as a correspondent from here for Kenya. The first question is, I want to focus on economic and trade relationship between Ethiopia and Somaliland. Can you put some figures on these trade relations over the past years, how it was growing? And the other is, there is expansion on the port of Berbera, and any progress on that one? That's also interesting to know. And why, finally, about the political issues that you just mentioned, why do you think these efforts have failed again and again to bring peace between the two brothers, Somaliland and the Somalia, since you have the same culture, the same religion, the same people, and how come it is difficult for you guys to come into consensus at some point? Thank you so much.
You know that there are always regular convoys from the port of Berbera. 1/3 of the food aid that is coming to Ethiopia comes from the port of Berbera, you know that. That is the formal UN food aid. But the other trade is growing in both directions. exports from Ethiopia and imports into Ethiopia. At any given time, you will see trucks, convoys with Ethiopian plate numbers from Berbera coming to Ethiopian borders. I don't know the size of it. I wish the Minister of Finance, who is here with us, could have given you that. But it is growing. Why no peace? The same question. Why were there bombs dropped on Hargeisa by the Somalis, by our brothers, the people from our color, the people from our religion, the people from our clans, the people who have ethnic similarity with us? Aggression. Somalia, aggression. Somaliland, we treat the sick, we educate the young, we give shelter to the poor, the beggars come to us. But Somalia does not want peace because terrorism has become their industry. And if they join us, we will, we require peace, stability, discipline, law and order. They don't want that because they gain from lawlessness.